Most students have a really hard time absorbing that reality. It just doesn't work. Work for what it is: brief, powerful, impactful.
Welcome to the Scriptcake podcast. Today is a really kind of special day for me because I get to have one of my mentors on the podcast, Dale Pollock. Dale is an award-winning teacher, writer, and filmmaker. His career began for Daily Variety, where he became the head film critic. He left for the LA Times to become their chief entertainment correspondent. Dale has been nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. He also wrote the book Skywalking, The Life and Films of George Lucas. He worked at David Geffen's company and was the president of A&M Films, where he produced movies like The Beast, Midnight Clear, and Mrs. Winterbourne. He ran his own company, Peak Productions, for 10 years and produced movies like Set It Off, Meet the Deedles, and Bats. In 1999, he became the dean of the School of Filmmaking at the North Carolina School of the Arts, which coincidentally happened to be my senior year as a student at the School of Filmmaking. Dale's last decision as the dean of the School of Filmmaking, I don't even know if he remembers this or not, was hiring me as producing faculty. That was the last thing. That was the last thing he did there. So
you were, I believe, the first alum we hired to teach.
Oh, wow. That was such a blessing. I can't tell you what a tremendous experience that was. Okay. Dale is currently retired from teaching at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, School of Filmmaking, and he was honored with an endowed professorship in film in his name. Dale also has a fascinating new book called Chopped that we'll talk about that resulted in the hanging of a Harvard professor coming out this fall. Welcome to the Scriptcake podcast, Dale. So happy to have you here.
It's great to be with you, Lavender.
It's always nice to reconnect. I have known you for now 23 years.
Yes, it's a long time.
It is a long time. So one of the things that dawns on me is I know you so well. I've learned so much from you, but I don't really know how you got started in this crazy film business situation. Can you kind of walk me through what got you into filmmaking?
Yeah, I have a pretty unusual backstory. My brother, when I was in high school, went to Yale, and he helped found the Yale Film Society. And I remember going up to New Haven to visit him. And then Yale had these suites of rooms, and they had a sheet up on a wall and a 16 millimeter projector and about 200 film cams. And they ran movies in their suite 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And just being immersed in that culture for a week had a big impact on me. When I went to college, I went to Brandeis University outside of Boston in Waltham, Massachusetts, and I started the Brandeis Film Society. So I basically did the same thing my brother had done. And we were very successful, and we were doing a different kind of programming. You know, the popular films in the late 60s and early 70s were primarily the foreign films: Bergman, Truffaut, Godard. Well, we weren't looking at those directors. We were looking at older American directors: John Ford, Howard Hawks, Orson Welles, Alan Dwan, all these classic American filmmakers we were rediscovering. And it turns out the same programming that I was doing at Brandeis was also being done at Harvard and at MIT. And I got a call from the guy who ran the Harvard Film Society saying, hey, we're all showing the same movies and we're all getting an audience. Maybe there's a bigger opportunity here. And there was a theater on Massachusetts Avenue in Cambridge, halfway between Harvard Square and Central Square, that had just gone out of business. Of course, it was the Harvard guy who had money, right? Family money. And he leased this theater, and all of a sudden, we were in the movie business. Wow. None of us had ever run a movie theater. We really kind of had no idea what we were doing, but we knew the films we wanted to show, and we knew there was an audience. And we decided to name the theater after Orson Welles. And I will tell you my best Orson Welles story, which is we sent him an invitation to come for the opening of the theater and asked him to christen the theater in his name. And we got the city of Cambridge to declare it Orson Welles Day. And he was going to ride in a parade from Harvard Square to the theater. And there he would get out and he would break a bottle of champagne on the door of the theater. And so we contacted him. He said absolutely he would do it. He would come, but we had to send him a first class round trip ticket. He wouldn't fly unless we got him a first class ticket. So we bought the ticket and I think we're all set. I won the honor of picking him up at the airport. So this is like the greatest thrill of my life. I'm going to drive Orson Welles in my car back to the hotel in Cambridge and get ready for this parade. Well, of course, he's not on the plane. He didn't try to make the plane. He cashed in the ticket. And we later learned that this is how he financed his later films. He would accept invitations from all around the world, demand first-class airfare, and then simply not go. Cash in the ticket, and that was his fund to continue filming his Don Quixote project and all the other movies he never got to finish.
Wow.
So we put a rather heavyset friend in a big hat, a big coat, and we pretended it was Orson Welles. We said he had laryngitis, so he couldn't speak. And we did the parade and we inaugurated the theater, and it was called the Orson Welles Cinema for the next 10 years.
Wow, that's awesome.
So, after a while, we lost control of the theater. We didn't really know what we were doing. But by that point, I had become a real movie buff. And I had met my wife. I waited a year for her to graduate. I worked as a dishwasher and a waiter. But when we moved to Santa Cruz, California, there was a daily paper, a weekly alternative paper. And I went to them and I said, look, I want to do movie reviews because I had written about films. And if I can get in free, I'll do the reviews for nothing. And they took that deal. And what happened was the daily paper, which was very conservative to the right of Ronald Reagan at the time, they saw the theater owners started quoting my reviews in their ads. And this infuriated the daily paper because here was this upstart weekly that's now being quoted in their advertising. So they came to me. They said, well, will you do reviews for us? And they knew I was getting paid nothing. So they said, we'll give you $10 a review. But you can't do more than 2 reviews a week. So you're limited to $20 a week. Well, I did that for a few weeks and I, this really wasn't doing anything for me. And to my surprise, they offered me a job they said, you can write. So we'll train you now. We'll hire you as a cub reporter. And so for the next 2 years, I covered county government, city hall. I did the police beat. I did everything that a regular reporter does. Plus, I became the entertainment reporter. I reviewed music. I reviewed theater. There wasn't much dance going on up there. And of course, I reviewed films. And eventually, they saw the economics of doing a Friday pull-out entertainment section. So I became the entertainment editor of this small paper, and we did a really good entertainment section. And the editor for Daily Variety vacationed in Santa Cruz, saw this paper, and called me and said, are you interested in doing reviews? We have stringers who review outside of Los Angeles. Are you interested in being one of those? And I said, yes. And then Jack Lemmon came up to shoot a TV movie, a remake of the Laurence Olivier, Tony Richardson film, The Entertainer. And I sold an interview with him to Variety. And they were very happy with that. And they offered me a job. Now, I was in a very comfortable position at the Santa Cruz Sentinel. I had the job that journalists dream of.
Mhm.
total control over what I was doing, entertainment editor, writing what I felt like, living in one of the most beautiful places on the California coast. But here was a chance to move to LA
Mhm.
with a job offer.
Yeah.
And the job offer paid less than what I was making in Santa Cruz.
Ooh.
I had just bought a house
Right.
and I had just had my first child. So it was a real decision moment in my life. And I remember saying to my wife, all the common sense tells me that I should just stay here in
Yeah.
Santa Cruz. But for the rest of my life, I will wonder, what if? And I don't want to live a what if life. So I moved down to LA by myself, took the job at Variety, took months for my wife to sell the house and bring our son down. But uh, I became ultimately the chief film reviewer for Variety, for Daily Variety. And that meant at that time for Weekly Variety also, because all the films were screened in LA before they were screened in New York. And I really loved what I was doing. I became their box office analyst. And then to my surprise, I had one of my colleagues had left Variety and gone to the LA Times.
Mhm.
And he, I guess, sang my praises, and they came to me and made me a job offer, and really pissed off the editor of Variety because I was his top film guy at that point. But how can you turn? I got an offer from the Wall Street Journal, and I got an offer from the LA Times.
Wow.
And the Wall Street Journal said once a month you have to do financial statements. You have to report on all the financial statements from all the big corporations. I said, I have no interest in that. So I took the LA Times job. And I became their chief film correspondent. I started a column called Film Clips. And when I was there, I did a major profile on a record producer who was moving into films named David Geffen.
Mm-hmm.
And he would not be interviewed. He never did interviews. So I had to write the story talking to everybody else who had worked with him or who was around him. And it was a pretty good story. They ran it on the front page of the Sunday calendar. And Monday morning, I get a call from David Geffen's office saying he wants to meet me. Now, this is normally only bad news, right? You've just written a profile on the guy and he wants to meet with you. So I said, do I need to bring the LA Times lawyer with me? And they said, no. And I went to see him and he said, look, I don't know how you did it, but that's the most accurate thing that's ever been written about me.
Wow.
So he said, so you clearly understand how to write a story. So I believe in picking unconventional people. So do you want to come to work for me as a development executive? And I had no experience developing screenplays. I had maybe read only 2 or 3 scripts in my life. I was a newspaper reporter.
Yeah.
My job was not reading screenplays. I think I had read all of Orson Welles' screenplays when we started the Orson Welles cinema, so I could be knowledgeable about him. When the LA Times came calling, they wanted me not to be a film reviewer, but to cover the industry from a business standpoint. And to do that, I started a column that is still in existence there called Film Clips.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a way for me. I did not want to be doing business reporting. That's why I turned down the Wall Street Journal.
Right.
I wanted to do creative reporting of the film business. So I interviewed directors, screenwriters, production designers, studio executives. I wrote about the business of Hollywood, but through a creative lens. And my writing became very popular. I was nominated for a Pulitzer for a piece I did on the Teamsters and the movie business. And the LA Times actually moved my family out of town the weekend that story broke because I had received some death threats.
Wow.
People were upset that I was writing about the Teamsters, taking advantage of the film studios. And I was very surprised when I was at the LA Times to then get a call from Geffen, and went out, met with him, took the job as a development executive. And I was just very, very lucky that in my second week on the job, the way things worked in those days is if there was a spec script, a script written by the writers on their own, the agents would pick likely producers for those and send that script out for a weekend read. And you basically had a choice after that weekend was up. Was this a script you wanted to go after or not? If you wanted to go after, the agency would be very happy to start a little bidding war. But if you were the only person, you could usually option that screenplay. And in my second week, I read a screenplay called Beetlejuice.
Wow.
And I had interviewed Tim Burton. I had done a profile on it. And I'm reading the script. I go, this is a Tim Burton movie. If I ever saw a Tim Burton movie, this is it. And so I called him and I sent him the script. And it turned out he had a deal at Warner Brothers and Geffen's deal was at Warner Brothers. And within 2 weeks, I had put together my first film.
Wow.
Now that was luck, but it was also me taking advantage of my relationships.
Yep.
And in my first year at Geffen, I was only there a year. I found Beetlejuice. I found The Burbs, which eventually starred Tom Hanks. And I found Universal Soldier, which eventually starred Kurt Russell. So I had, coming out of A&M, a good reputation for finding material.
Yeah.
And that got me the job at A&M Films as vice president of production. And within a year, I put together 3 movies, The Beast, The Mighty Quinn, and Worth Winning.
Mm-hmm.
And I was off and running as a producer. And the reason I was successful, I believe, at A&M was I had a development fund. I had money to hire writers and work with writers on multiple drafts before I sent a script out to the studios.
Mm.
So most people were just taking a script that had not really been worked on and throwing it out there for the weekend read. I was interested in putting together a highly developed script, hopefully packaged with a director, with me as the producer, and turned out that formula worked well for me. I produced 12 feature films in 10 years.
My goodness.
And I just had a knack, as it turned out, for getting these films made. I didn't have a knack for them being completely successful. So I had a knack for working with first-time directors. 5 of my films were with first-time directors, and I believe I guided them really well through the process. And I developed writer-centric material. I felt all my material was strong and was maybe too literary at times as I look back on it. But I felt that I really had a formula and it was working. It just didn't lead to a lot of box office success.
Right.
And that didn't really come until late in my career when I finally had my big hit film, Set It Off. But unfortunately, it was with a studio that was notorious for not paying its creative participants. That was New Line Cinema. And so the big movie that I produced, I never really saw any income from. And that was depressing. And when I was really having trouble getting films made, the fact that I had made a really successful movie and not seen anything from it was a big motivator for me to really leave the business and go into teaching, to share the knowledge that I had accumulated. While I was producing, I was approached by a gentleman named Larry Terman, who had produced The Graduate. I mean, he was one of the great Hollywood producers, and he ran the Peter Stark producing program in the graduate school at USC, University of Southern California. So I guest taught there on several occasions, and it went really well. And he offered me a job to come there, but I didn't want to work for him. I wanted to run my own program if I was going to teach producing. And luckily, AFI offered me that opportunity. I knew the chairman of the board of AFI very well, a guy named Bob Remy, who had run New Line Cinema. And he came to me and to Deborah Hill, who produced all the John Carpenter Halloween movies, and really every movie John Carpenter made, along with a number of other great films. He came to the two of us and said, would we start a strong producing program at the American Film Institute? Because all they had was a directing program and a cinematography program. They were just starting production design, editing, and they wanted a strong producing program. So Deborah Hill and I set that up. We each taught when we weren't making a film. And that was where I was approached by the North Carolina School of the Arts. I had been recommended by David McHugh, who had gone to teach film music, but his kids and my kids were friends. That's how I knew him. And he recommended me. And so they sent me a letter asking me to come to North Carolina to be interviewed. And I was at a kind of low point in my career. I had been producing movies for Disney, and I did a film called Meet the Deedles that was just awful. And I said, if this is my future, I don't want it. Right. And I was on a film called, God, You'll Never Be Home for Christmas with Jonathan Taylor Thomas, another dreadful film. And it was the only time in my career I quit. I quit 2 weeks before principal photography. I just couldn't take it anymore.
Wow.
And I had 3 kids, and I lived in an expensive neighborhood in Santa Monica Canyon. And so I was a little freaked out. And my teaching salary was not enough to support me. But then along came this order, this offer to go to the North Carolina School of the Arts and be the second dean of filmmaking. It was almost like being the first dean, because the school had only graduated 1 class before I came.
Yep.
The class of 1998 was the very first class to graduate. No, 97 was the first class. I was in the third. 99, I was the third grade. But it was almost, because Sam Grogg had checked out by that point. Mentally, he was gone, and he was physically gone.
Right.
When I came, David Elkins was actually the interim dean.
That's right.
So it was really kind of starting my career over again. I was starting at the top of a school, but in a field that I had never really been in before. Right. And for the first 6 months, I was in Winston by myself because my kids were in school in California. I had to sell my house.
Right.
So my first 6 months were like, immersion by being dunked in cold water. But luckily, there were so many talented students at that point. I mean, Danny McBride graduated in my first class, Jody Hill, Jeff Nichols was 2 years later. You were in that class. There were so many talented people.
Craig Zobel,
yep. Zine Baker.
Yep. Baker, he graduated. The year before us, actually. He graduated in 98. Yeah.
So, I mean, it was just a great time for me to be at School of the Arts. I think I brought a new perspective to the school. I had very different experiences than Sam Grogg had had.
Yeah, you brought a new energy. You brought definitely a new energy to the school. And
I felt I was very writer-centric. I came in not wanting to improve the directing program as much as the screenwriting program, because I knew without good scripts, you cannot have good films. And if you can really teach students how to write effective short screenplays, they can apply those methods to feature-length screenplays. And that was one of my really focuses when I came in. It was to really strengthen screenwriting and to make scripts the basis of what we did. And not an autorial vision by a director,
right? Because
I thought the worst thing you can do in film school is have film by credits, right? Nobody in film school should have a film by.
I think that's valid.
They should learn that it's collaborative, and the film is by all of you, and it starts with what's on the printed page.
Yeah, I think that's a struggle in a lot of film programs where, no matter who wrote it or who produced it or whoever, the director becomes the driving force behind it, but they have no sense of story. They have no sense of, how to actually coordinate and produce something. And, in many cases, they become little monsters because when they get to the real world, that's not how it's going to happen. The
No.
real world's going to slap them around a little bit and go, you're not in charge here, buddy.
And, I got really tired of trying to police the fact that directors would rewrite the scripts in secret, shoot their version of the script on the set, where the version we had approved was sitting in a box.
Yeah.
So, I went through all those little things, but I ultimately felt that in my tenure at the school, we turned out some really strong filmmakers.
You really did. Yeah.
And I'm proud of that. And it's been really sad and depressing for me to see that has not been happening in recent years.
Mhm.
We aren't turning out the Craig Zobels and the Lavinder Gills and the people who are making things happen. I'm really happy with the choice of the new dean, this woman, Deborah Levine, who came from Cal Arts.
Right.
That's a film school with a really high standard. And she's bringing that standard to our school. And the fact that she brings a female perspective
Mhm.
and that she's an actual director. Every dean at the film school up until her has been a producer. And that might have been a problem looking back.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting.
She's the first director to be the dean, the first independent filmmaker to be a dean, the first experimental filmmaker to be a dean, and the first documentary filmmaker to be a dean. So I see her appointment as a real kind of growth for the film school.
Right.
And, look, the pandemic wreaked havoc with every educational institution across the world.
Mm-hmm.
But it was particularly acute for conservatories.
Right.
Because conservatory is one-on-one instruction. And when that's being done online, that simply is not as effective. So I think programs like ours were affected more than traditional academic programs. And I think creative students felt really stymied and frustrated and missing a collective experience. They were so looking forward to working on sets, so looking for our whole system, where the third and fourth years basically taught the first and second years. Well, that just stopped.
You're right. Yeah.
And that was really damaging to the students, to the school, to the films that were being made. Now, I've seen a change. There were a couple of films that came out at the end of this year that are the best films that I've seen in the school for 10 or 15 years.
Oh, fantastic.
There's one film in particular made by a Black filmmaking student about minstrel puppets in the 30s. And it's really clever and intelligent, and apparently it wowed CAA. He's going to get signed.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so I'm seeing some positive, but I will be honest with you, the last several years, the film's been very depressing.
I bet. Yeah.
There was a sharp drop-off from the early 2000s to 2008 till now, about not very many good student films. We've never made it to the Student Academy Awards. We have never had a film of the Student Academy Awards since Randy Benson's documentary about animal shelters.
Randy Benson, he graduated in the first class in '97.
And we have not had a single film nominated for a Student Academy Award since then.
Wow.
So that's the challenge for Dean Levine. It's the challenge for everybody who's working at the film school now. You got to up the game. We are not competitive. We don't belong in the top 20 film schools if we're not turning out filmmakers who are making significant or successful films.
Right. Now, that all goes back to story. So one thing I would love to talk about is you said you had a development fund and that you would develop these stories. So what exactly does that process entail?
For the writers who worked with me, it meant line by line notes. I would do notes that would usually run between 10 and 30 pages on a script. I did detailed line notes, detailed character notes, detailed dialogue notes. And I regard myself as not the boss of the screenwriter, but the collaborator of the screenwriter.
Mhm.
And what I'm trying to do is get the strongest script so I can attract the best director and the best talent. The one thing I learned in my years was this material is everything. If you want to get someone excited, you need a good piece of material. And if you get them excited about that, they will do the film. When I had a midnight clear, I had three of the hottest actors, young actors in the business, Gary Sinise, Ethan Hawke, Kevin Dillon. They all did the film for scale because they loved the material.
Wow.
If Paul Newman cut his fee to do Blaze because he loved the script. So when you have good material, good things happen, good talent is attractive. So that was my goal. How can I make the scripts I'm doing so strong that a studio will have to say yes?
Right.
Because I put together a strong package, a director, a strong script, and a good idea of what the film's going to cost.
Okay. So let's dig into that a little bit more. What are the most common things that you had to do with these scripts that came in? You know, is there something in particular that sticks out, or?
Yeah, I will tell you, I could judge a good script by the first 15 pages.
Okay.
Without a doubt. If
All
those 15 pages did not engage me,
right.
did not show me a character I'm interested in, did not have something interesting happening, I rarely read past page 20.
Okay.
If something in the first 15 pages didn't grab me.
Well, let's pause right there. Give me some examples of something in the first 15 pages that grabbed you, that made you realize, okay, I'm onto something here.
When I read the first draft of Set It Off,
Mhm.
it was not well written. The screenwriter was an amateur.
Mhm.
He had taken a couple of screenwriting classes, but he had never written. And so the script was kind of all over the place. But what I saw were these great female Black characters I had never seen on screen. And that was evident in the first 15 pages. He introduced all the major characters. A large Black lesbian, a woman who lived for her brother's success, another woman who had made it out of the hood and was working in banking and saw her career on the upswing. Everything was changed by one event. And when I saw it, I said, this can be a great film. And we developed that film. And I did it on my own with the writer because we didn't have a director on that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went to New Line, and they had made a movie called Friday,
Mm-hmm.
which nobody had seen, but they knew how good F. Gary Gray was.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to go in and get F. Gary Gray on the strength of what the script could be.
Mm.
And once we were able to set the film up at New Line, they then spent money and brought in a really good writer, Kate Lanier, who wrote the Tina Turner film, What's Love Got to Do with It? A white woman who was capable of writing great Black female dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
She actually grew up in Philadelphia in
Oh.
a mixed neighborhood, and that was why she had such an ear for Black dialogue. But if that hadn't all been evident in the first 15 pages, and when the agents sent me the script, they said, Dale, nobody gets this movie. Nobody thinks it has potential, but we think you will think it has potential. So that was both flattering and challenging, right? Because they were saying, nobody else can make this, see if you can. And it's one of the proudest things I did. I got that film made, and it proved to be what I thought it would be. Right. It was groundbreaking. It did establish a new kind of Black female action hero. Mm-hmm. There had never been anything like those characters on the screen. Yeah. So that's the kind of example. Everybody else in Hollywood had passed on that script. I was the last person they sent it to. not the first. So that was how my system of developing material worked before it was set up.
Well, as someone who's now, taught, worked in the film industry, run a film school, when we're working with students, because at the end of the day, there's so many millions of novice screenwriters that kind of want to get to that next level. What are some of the biggest shortcomings you see in stuff that's coming out now that people really need to spend more time focusing on?
Well, try not to jam a feature into a short film. A short film does not have a 3-act structure. You don't have time for a 3-act structure. You have an incident, and then what happens before or after the incident.
Right.
That's your structure for a short film.
Okay.
Most students have a really hard time absorbing that reality.
Right.
They keep saying, well, if I can just get this into the film. And all of a sudden, they're trying to compress a feature into 15 to 20 minutes, and it just doesn't work. Make a short film work for what it is: brief, powerful, impactful. Don't make it as, oh, I'm doing a trailer for my feature.
Right.
That is not what a short film would be. And if you look at the history of short films that were turned into feature films, most fail.
Yeah.
I mean, there's plenty of short films that won the Academy Award, and they then tried to make it into a feature, didn't work.
I remember the movie Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow was picked up because it was an amazing short, and they made a feature that just had no story, and it
Didn't work.
Yeah,
Didn't
the
work.
effects were great. Well, let's talk about novice writers writing features, because I know you've read a lot of scripts in your life.
I have.
Yeah, what takes it to that next level?
Some sense of vision. How do you know? It leaps off the page, Lavinder. When you're reading a good writer, you know it right away.
Yeah.
You don't need to read 50 pages to say to yourself, oh, this person's pretty good. You know it in the first 10 or 15 pages. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
The chaff separates from the wheat really easily when it comes to writing. Because you can tell the people who have a gift for it, and you can see the people who don't.
Now, let's talk about the difference between having a gift for it and having a producible project. Because there's a lot of people that have a gift for writing that cannot structure.
I agree. And part of it is you've got to work with someone who really understands the film business.
Right.
That's why it was good for me to be able to say to a writer, not only will I develop this script with you, but I will guide you through getting this film made. That's my pledge to you, producer to writer. I will not lose you along the way. You will stay involved at every step. And I did. I involved writers in casting. I involved writers. Every writer came to the set when we started shooting. Now, I had to kick writers off the set who would sit and go to an actor and begin to tell them how they should play their role.
Right.
So there is a place for the writer, and there's a place where the writer should not be. But this doesn't work if you don't respect writers.
Sure.
If you don't treat writers with respect and they don't feel that you respect them, they won't do the best work for you. So right from the beginning, you have to establish a relationship of respect, and what the writer is bringing to the relationship and what you are bringing to the relationship. And what I felt good is with almost every one of my films, at the end of the movie, I still had a good relationship with the writer. And that does not always happen.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So in this experience of developing these works with these writers, how big a change is there from the original material to, what actually gets produced? How much effort goes into that process?
An enormous amount. And I would say every film I developed changed, sometimes significantly. Other times, you just have the core story and you don't want to lose it. So in Blaze, we knew what our story was. We knew it was a romance between a stripper and a crazy old governor. I mean, we couldn't change that story that much. But the reason Ron Shelton wrote Bull Durham and White Men Can't Jump is he's really good at writing character. So, our problem on Blaze was not his writing or his direction of the acting. The problem with Blaze was once he started making the movie, he realized he couldn't decide which character the movie was about. So it kept being a tug of war between the Paul Newman character and the Lolita Davidovich character. Was it really about Paul Newman? And ultimately, he couldn't make up his mind, and the film did not succeed because people felt that. You're watching the movie and go, well, whose story am I really identifying with here? Yeah. And because he couldn't tell, the audience couldn't tell.
I've been there myself, Dale. I remember I wrote a feature length based on one protagonist, but I just loved writing this other character so much. And by the end of it, I realized, oh, it's that character's film, not this. So the rewrite was significant on that,
Yeah, yeah. And unfortunately, we didn't figure that out till we were shooting the movie. And so the movie never completely recovered. It's why it's a pretty flawed film. But otherwise, I had a script. I had a book called The Midnight Clear by William Morton. And I went through 5 writers before I found Keith Gordon, who was able to realize that screenplay. And my deal with him is, if you can make the script good enough that I can get it sold, you can direct it. Okay. He had directed one film, The Chocolate War. And so that was a great incentive for him.
Absolutely.
He worked his butt off on that rewrite. And it got good enough that with him attached, we got $4.5 million to make that movie. It sure wasn't much,
right?
But we put it all on the screen. And I venture to say that's the cheapest World War II movie ever made. It feels like you're actually in the war.
So what was it about the first 4 writers that didn't quite work? What was the issue?
The movie the script never took off. It was just sort of talky. There was a lot of talking and not much action.
Okay.
And Keith was able to come in and really focus on the 2 key characters to the whole story, the Ethan Hawke character and the Gary Sinise character. They are the key to the film. And he really worked on those 2 characters. And then he really had a sense. He went and watched, he told me, more than 50 World War II movies.
Oh my goodness.
To really get a sense of how the soldiers talk to each other. And that's what he then brought. So William Morton had written great dialogue, but it felt literary. Keith made it feel cinematic. And then, we had to deal with all these guys who were all, Ethan Hawke was just at the beginning of his career. Dead Poets Society.
Dead Poets Society, yeah.
Dead Poets Society had not come out long before we started filming. Okay. So he was so we had a lot of egos to deal with. I mean, all these guys had cut their fees. Everybody was working for scale. So I couldn't even afford a trailer for each of the actors. They had to share a large trailer. That's how low budget our film was. But we had a great script, and the script made it on the screen. And that's why I still think it's the single best film I ever made.
Good to know. I'll have to go back and revisit that. I don't think I've seen it in 20 some years.
Yeah, what I'm proud of is I donated my print to the school.
Oh.
I had 5 prints of my films, and they're all donated now to the school. I donated all my film poster collection, all my papers as a producer, all my project files, all given to the archives.
That's fantastic. Yeah, the archives I think that building was just being built when I was
there.
So that was
and it's good. Like Tom Ackerman donated all his stuff from his career.
Oh, great.
So I think the archives is trying to grow it that way now.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Well, let's talk about your post-film career. I know you work as a film critic still with the local TV station.
Yes, I do. Now I'm happy. I've expanded it to not just features, but I'm reviewing streaming series also. Well, you got to go where the audience is, right? And a lot more people are watching streaming now than are going to movie theaters.
Well,
I'll still go to the movie theater. I went and saw Downton Abbey the other day, and it was a very pleasant experience. I'm not a huge fan of the show. The film was really well made. It was really nice seeing it on a big screen, beautifully photographed. So, I mean, I'll still go to the movies. I didn't go for almost 2 years, but I'm going again now. And I don't think my age group is coming back. I think they're essentially done with the movie theater experience. They realize how easy it is to stream almost anything from their home. You know, the way HBO and Disney were doing day and date releases online. What's their motive to go? And they're worried about their health. So when I go now, I'm almost always the oldest person in the theater. You don't see a lot of white-haired people in the movie theaters anymore. And we saw it at River Run this year. Unfortunately, our attendance was significantly down because most of our audience is older.
Right.
And they're still not going out to movie theaters. And will that change in the next couple of years? I think so, but I do believe a large part of the older audience is gone. It's not coming back. And I think the movie-going experience is going to shrivel until it's pretty much only the really big IMAX screen experience is going to survive. I just think that's the way globally it's going. Theaters all over the world are trying to recover from this huge loss of attendees, and it's pretty much not happening.
Right.
I mean, when they're overjoyed with $156 million opening for Top Gun Maverick, when that used to be a middling opening weekend, 125 million, right?
Yeah.
Now that's, oh my God, that's our salvation. AMC is not going to survive with the number of theaters they have and the number of people going to the movies.
Right.
I'm not sure an art theater like Aperture can survive.
Oh, that's
when their theaters, their screens are barely bigger than what you're looking at home.
Right. That's true.
And you're being charged $12 for it.
Yeah.
So, I just think the ultimate movie-going experience is going to be limited to big budget spectaculars and very little else.
Well, let's talk about this shift now, because, over the decades, the film industry has shifted quite a bit. Back in the 70s, it was all about the independent,
Right.
outside the box thinking films. In the 80s, it became about the big blockbusters, that you had going on. And then you had kind of a little break when video really took off with VHS and DVD.
Right.
Now there were other markets. Well, now we have streaming, and it's completely kind of put everything upside down. Talk about the process right now.
I think,
going.
The creativity is moving to streaming. I mean, if you look at the movie business, it's really two businesses now, Marvel and everybody else. Those are the only two viable businesses in movie theaters. Where's all the talent going? It's going to streaming. What really hasn't caught up is, where are the downstream profits for creative people? When Amazon and Netflix will really not release the number of viewers, how is this going to work in compensation down the line?
Right.
You used to be able to say, well, my film grossed $200 million, therefore I get this much. Well, there's no formula for how many viewers there are, because those people aren't paying in the same way.
Right.
They're paying a monthly fee. They're not paying for your film. So I think the big issue to still be resolved is, how is not the upfront payment, how is the later distribution of income going to go? Because that has really not been settled out late. That's still the big question mark right now. In other words, if you don't get it all up front, are you ever going to see anything else? Right. And if everybody has to get everything up front, then the budgets just go higher and higher.
Right.
Part of the idea of streaming is you could break your cost down over 8 or 10 episodes, right? So your cost per episode is much less than your cost for a feature film. But when you have these really expensive stars in these series and the production budgets are going up, where's the back end?
Right.
So I think that's a big issue that still needs to be worked out. I do think the creative impulse now is all towards streaming. Because look, before you used to have to fit your story in 120 minutes.
Right.
Now you have 240 minutes, 8 times 60, right?
Right.
That's a lot of time to tell your story. So for most storytellers, they want to be expanded, not limited. That's another reason all the good writers are going towards streaming, because it's an expanded version of their vision.
So when you're thinking about people who are developing and, you know, starting their screenwriting career, do you think they should focus more on, you know, episodic streaming shows, features? Like, where's the direction?
I think you're still best off writing an independent feature.
Okay.
Nobody's going to look at your streaming idea if you have no history of getting anything made. The streaming world is not open to novices,
Right.
the way the film world has always been.
Right.
There's too much at stake. So, you know, if you're a writer and you have the most fantastic idea in the world, maybe you can sell it as a streamer.
Right.
I doubt it, because I don't know how you're going to get access to the people who would make that decision if you've never written or directed or produced anything. But I think writing the low budget feature is still a way in. Festivals still show low budget independent features all over the world. You still have the opportunity to make a reputation. David Gordon Green's career would have gone nowhere if George Washington had not played the Berlin Film Festival and been noticed. He never would have gotten off the ground.
And he's one of the biggest filmmakers out there right now.
That's right. And streaming as well as feature film. He's doing both.
Right.
My way, the easiest way in, write a feature that will knock my socks off. Write a feature that is not like anything else out there. Write a feature where the dialogue is so good that actors ache to say it. Anybody can do that. All that takes is a computer and talent.
An effort.
Format is the easiest thing in the world now, right? People used to say, oh, I don't understand format. That's all bullshit. Do you have a good story? Can you make it last for 90 minutes? That's the challenge. It's been the same challenge for 100 years. The challenge doesn't go away.
That's true. Well, speaking of challenges, you have a new challenge with your first novel coming out. Let's talk about that a little bit. Tell me.
Well, I've also written a streaming outline for it.
Cool.
I did synopses for 6 episodes.
All right.
And hopefully, if the book takes off, I'll have a series all ready to go for it. I think now when you write fiction, you also need to have that in your mind. How are you going to sell this? How is this going to go beyond the printed page? The other thing that is revolutionary, you know, I sent my novel out to a lot of literary agents and nobody bought. You know, so what's my big message? Don't wait till your 60s to write your first novel, right? If I had written my first novel in my 30s, I'd be better at it by now.
Yeah.
So my advice to young writers is start young and start writing in a variety of formats, because you never really know where you're going to end up being successful. You know, there's just so many different things to write about now.
Yes.
Now, you know, I'm switching back to what I know I'm good at, nonfiction, but I still have another historical novel I want to write. So the fact that I'm self-publishing my first novel does not stop me from wanting to write another one. I learned a lot writing this one. You can now self-publish through Amazon, as you have learned, and you can be successful at it.
Right.
And you can be an Amazon bestseller.
Absolutely.
And you can be noticed and you can be reviewed. This market is much more accessible than it has ever been before.
That's true.
They used to call self-publishing vanity publishing, because that's what it was.
Right.
It was, oh, nobody wants my book. I'm going to show me how good my book is, right? Well, now you don't, now nobody wants my book. Fine. There are different ways for me to go.
Right.
And that's pretty revolutionary in what used to be a binary business. Yes or no. Yes, we'll publish you. No, we won't. And if then we'll never publish you and you'll never be published.
Right. Well, the movie
And
The
that-
Martian was self-published as a book, and now it became one of the biggest movies of that year that came out.
Exactly. And now they're developing a series off of it.
Oh, wow. Fantastic.
Yeah.
About Chopped, what made you want to write that? How'd you find out about it? Tell me about
Well,
that.
it was in my wife's family lore. And my mother-in-law had tried in the 1950s. She did some research and tried to put some thoughts together. But when I said to my wife, I want to try to write my first novel, she said, write this story about my family.
Mhm.
There's this great connection. And we have the original book that he wrote that was published in 1850.
Well, let's tell us the story, because I
So
don't know
the story is
Yeah.
the wealthiest man in Boston in 1849 was named George Parkman. He was worth the equivalent today of $8 billion.
Wow.
He was worth more than $1 million in 1849. He owned 2,500 residences in Boston that he collected rent from. And he goes to the medical school building one afternoon and he never comes out. He vanishes. A $5,000 reward in 1849, that's equivalent of $100,000.
Mhm.
Nobody can find his body. Finally, the janitor of the medical school gets the police and say, I have found body parts hanging in the privy of the chemistry professor. The police come, there's a torso, a leg, the arms are gone, the head is gone. They're hanging on fish hooks. It's the chemistry professor's room. They find a foot, a hand in the furnace, and they find false teeth. The chemistry professor is accused of murder. It's an enormous scandal for Harvard. It's an enormous scandal for Boston. This becomes the first mass media trial of the telegraph age. So after every court day, reporters are telegraphing what was said in court. It goes by telegraph all over the world. There are reporters from Australia and Africa at this trial in 1850 in Boston. Herman Melville is the son-in-law of the judge and attends the trial every day. The judge, Lemuel Shaw, rules on circumstantial evidence. He changes law with this ruling. Now you can convict people of murder on purely circumstantial evidence because there was no corpse. There were simply unidentified body parts. My wife's great-great-grandfather is a graduate of Harvard Medical School, studied under the chemistry professor, and is a specialist in anatomy. He is brought in to determine, do these parts belong to the same body? He determines they do. Therefore, they move forward with the trial for murder.
Wow.
The Harvard professor is convicted based on this doctor's testimony, right? He is publicly hanged, the only time a Harvard professor has been hanged. And my wife's great-great-grandfather, despite being warned not to do it, publishes his account of the trial, taken using Pittman shorthand, a revolutionary new method of communication. And because he does this on his own, he is blackballed in Boston society, loses his medical practice, has to move out of Boston and reinvent his life in Dorchester, Massachusetts.
Wow.
So that was my story.
That's a lot of story.
And I had to write character and dialogue, which I had done in film, but not in a novel. So it was a real learning process. I went and hired an independent book editor who really helped me, particularly structurally. She really helped me. I think it's a pretty good book. Was I surprised that it didn't get picked up? No, because honestly, who's going to sign a 70-year-old? Now I'm 72. A 70-year-old author. There's not a big future in that author, right? So I wasn't, I mean, I was depressed, but I wasn't shocked that I didn't get an agent to represent this book. But I am confident that if I self-publish it effectively on Amazon, it will find an audience.
Okay.
And it has a chance at finding a streaming future because it's a murder trial.
Well,
and murder trials have a good structure.
They do. They do. That works out well. So what's the next project? What are you working on next?
I'm working on a book I'm calling Senior Moments. It's how the movies have depicted aging and how that has radically changed in the 21st century. Where before, characters in their 50s, in The Graduate and Bancroft, is the older woman.
Right.
She's actually in reality 2 years older than Dustin Hoffman, but she becomes the older woman. So the whole idea of Helen Mirren becomes an action star at the age of 70 in the Red movies.
Yeah, that's right.
Liam Neeson becomes an action star in his late 60s in the Taken movies. This never happened before.
Yeah, I remember Angela Lansbury played Frank Sinatra's mother in The Manchurian Candidate. And she was younger than he was at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. At the same time, when you have older classic actresses, you end up with Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. So the old actress has to be a demonic old biddy.
Right.
So all these stereotypes that Hollywood put older actors into. And then, of course, now that begins to change. And you see it in a film like The Judge with Robert Downey and Robert Duvall, right? So that's generational change. You see it in a movie like Rosemary's Baby, where the older people are the diabolical people. So how do you change these stereotypes of old people and make them different in the 21st century? So that's what I'm looking at. There was a very successful book by Janine Bassinger, who runs cinema studies at Wesleyan University. She did a book on marriage in the movies called I Do, I Don't. And that was my inspiration for this.
Oh, fantastic.
I said, how can I write a book that really touches on film history throughout, but is about something specific? And I went, wait a minute, what's the thing I know a lot about right now? Being old. I know about that.
You're familiar?
So why not write about something I know about and combine it with the other thing I love, which is cinema?
Yeah.
So this is my way about writing about old people in cinema.
No, that's fascinating. I had never even thought of it before you mentioned it, but you're right. I mean, even like, Queen Latifah, as bookended Set It Off, now she's an action star in her old,
exactly.
With the Equalizer series and whatnot. And so, yeah, Liam Neeson's career just kind of came back out of nowhere, when he did.
And Bruce Willis had done it too. Now, Bruce Willis is a demonstration that old age eventually catches up with you in some ways, and he will no longer be able to act. So, that's the old person story in reality.
Yeah.
People don't want to see that. I mean, there are a certain number of really strong Alzheimer's films, but nobody's really lining up to see the next Alzheimer's movie, right? Because none of us want to think we're going to end up there.
Right.
So negotiating senior issues is kind of interesting in this era. And that's what I'm writing about. I'm also interviewing Liam Neeson and Helen Mirren. I'm interviewing these people, and I'm interviewing specialists in gerontology, because the science of aging is undergoing revolutionary change right now through genetic manipulation. They believe that they can manipulate genes so that the normal human lifespan will be 100 to 120 years, and that those changes can happen within the next 5 years.
Wow.
That's how fast the aging science is advancing.
Right.
Through DNA and gene splicing technology. I mean, I read this book, Ageless, that blew my mind. It was published in 2018, and it's already almost out of date.
Yeah, things are changing rapidly for us. As someone who is rapidly aging myself, I know exactly what
No,
you're saying.
yeah. And, what's the one universal experience we all go through?
It's coming for all of us.
There's no escape. Many people have tried, no one has succeeded.
Right.
And no one else has succeeded in coming back and really telling us what it's like.
Right.
So, it's the great mystery facing all of us.
Mhm.
And that's a good dramatic element to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So I'm trying to write the book in a way that it's dramatic in itself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm focusing on 20 films.
Okay.
There's one chapter of historical, and there's this amazing movie that was made in the 30s called Make Way for Tomorrow. Leo McCarey film. It's considered the definitive film on old age in Hollywood. And it was so depressing that no one made another one for 20 years, right? The film is so depressing. So I hopefully my book will be the right thing at the right time. We'll see.
It seems like you've made a career of being in the right place at the right time. So I don't think
I've tried, man. I've blown it sometimes and I've made it sometimes. And that's kind of, you look back on life, that's what the track record is.
Well, I am grateful for you. You had a tremendous impact on my career.
Well, thank you, Lavinder. That's really nice to hear.
And you're still having an impact on my career just by coming and doing this podcast.
Well, this has been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed this. I think it's great you're doing this.
Well, thank
you.
Really
Good.
We're excited about it, and we're excited to see your new book coming out.
Yep.
And to continue to learn from you. You have so much to offer. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anytime you want me to do this, I'm happy to come back for a repeated performance.
Absolutely. We'll definitely make that happen.
All right.
Thank you so much for watching this video, and as a small token of my appreciation, I want to offer you a free video course on how to outline your screenplay. I normally charge $299 for this course, but for a limited time, it is free. Now, it is a 5-day course, but I'm giving you 7 days to finish this outline, okay? After 7 days, that course goes away. So if you're not dedicated and you don't want to knock out a killer outline for your screenplay, don't do it. But if you do, click the link below. I can't wait to hear how you like it.